Well, hello. It's good to have this opportunity to send out this little video for the midweek. I hope y'all find it encouraging, as I did as I reread some portions of this little book that I've referenced several times over the last couple of weeks, Not Home Yet, by Ian K. Smith. This comes from the chapter entitled The Journey Home. And so I want to back up in the reading to page 108 and read to the end of the chapter. I may make some comments, but I think it pretty much is self-explanatory and easy to follow. I hope it's a blessing to you as you meditate on it, as you, those of you who have the book, if you reread this portion, and then as you use it perhaps in part of your family worship. I think it'd be a delightful thing, especially those with children, to help our children start thinking biblically about what's out there, what's to come, what we're looking forward to, and why we should look forward to it. Here we go. The story of the crucifixion concludes with darkness. Creation had done the unthinkable to its creator. As we read of darkness covering the land in Mark 15:33, it would be good to remember that darkness is not an entity. Darkness is the absence of an entity called light. An act of uncreation was happening. Darkness was the state of pre-creation back in Genesis chapter 1, prior to the first day of creation when God said, "Let there be light." This darkness is God withdrawing his light from the world in judgment. He references Amos chapter 8, Joel chapter 2, and Zephaniah chapter 1. But God has not given up on his creation. From this act of judgment will come a new creation. The first day of creation was the first day of the week. The first day of the new creation was also the first day of the week. Resurrection Sunday. The climax of each of the Gospels is Jesus' resurrection. The way we read the resurrection will impact the way we read the Bible, and vice versa. Many Christians today will say that the resurrection means that they will go to heaven when they die. At one level, that's true, but if that's the only answer, it's to miss so much of the significance of the event. After all, the resurrection was not about Jesus being raised to heaven. He was raised to earth, where he appeared to many for 40 days. As we previously noted, it's important not to confuse the resurrection and the ascension. The resurrection is about the homecoming of the final Adam to the earth that ushers in its renewal and gives meaning to legitimate activity on earth. The Old Testament foresaw a resurrection that focused more on Israel than on individuals. Some Old Testament passages do refer to the resurrection of individuals. Job 19, Isaiah 26, Daniel chapter 12 are all given as references. But the major thrust of the Old Testament deals with post-exilic renewal of Jerusalem, the rebirth of Israel. He highlights here Ezekiel chapter 37. And the new heavens and the new earth in Isaiah chapter 65. We'll get there one of these days in our Sunday series. As such, resurrection was not simply a pious hope about the new life of dead people. It carried with it all that was associated with the return from exile itself, the forgiveness of sins, the reestablishment of Israel as the true humanity of the covenant God, and the renewal of all creation. In the resurrection of Jesus, this future and culminating point of history has entered into current history. This is illustrated in the dialogue between Jesus and Martha following the raising of Lazarus. Martha gives her understanding of Lazarus' resurrection when she says, I know he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. John 11:24. But Jesus points out in his reply that this eschatological reality is manifest within history. I am the resurrection and the life, Jesus said in John 11:25. The resurrection becomes the first fruits of all that would follow. 1 Corinthians 15 talks about this. It was the final vindication for which Israel had been waiting. The exile was over. Sins were forgiven. Israel was renewed in a covenant relationship with God, and the blessings flowed to the ends of the earth. It's important to note that resurrection is not to be confused with immortality. When Paul addressed his Greek audience in Athens in Acts 17, many scoffed at him because of his teaching on the resurrection. This was not because the Greeks did not believe in life after death. Many did. It was because they had no category for the resurrection of the same physical body that was buried. After his resurrection, Jesus convinced his disciples that he was the same Jesus who had been crucified. The gospel writers emphasize the senses of touch in Luke 24 and John chapter 20, the sense of sight in Matthew 28 and Luke 24 and John 20, and even the sense of taste as Jesus eats food with them in Luke 24. Thomas recognizes the wounds of Jesus' hands and sides in John 20. The biblical teaching of resurrection embodies so much more than immortality. Sadly, in my experience, Christians still wrestle with a wrong belief about the resurrection. We affirm the resurrection in the creeds, but we often interpret it as immortality. In other words, what he's just said earlier, we're going to go to heaven when we die. Well, our souls go immediately to be with heaven. Check out those last two chapters of our Westminster Confession for clarity on this. But our bodies, at that point, when we die on this earth, remain in the ground, united to Christ, waiting for that day when he's coming, and our bodies will come out of the ground. Our souls will come with Christ from heaven. They'll be reunited and glorified into a body that will never have pain, never have sickness, never have death. Do we understand the resurrection of our physical bodies and of the physical earth? We're brought home through the death and resurrection of Jesus in the renewal of our home. The sin that led to exile is paid on the cross. Israel is reborn in the resurrection. The renewal of all things is guaranteed through Jesus' physical renewal. Our home will be renewed, and our resurrected and transformed bodies will live here. The gospel forgives our sin, removes our shame, vanquishes our fear, and brings us home. We should not lose sight of any of these dimensions. We are people of the resurrection. That's good news. Enjoy it as you ponder it tonight. God bless.